Chapter 2, Diggory and his uncle. It was so sudden and so horribly unlike anything that had happened to Diggory in a nightmare that he had let out a scream. Instantly, Uncle Andrew's hand was over his mouth. None of that, he hissed. If you start making a noise, your mother will hear it, and you know what a fright might do to her. As Diggory said afterward, the horrible meanness of getting at a chap in that way almost made him sick, but of course he didn't scream again. That's better, said Uncle Andrew. Perhaps you couldn't help it. It was a shock to you when first you see something vanish. Why, it even gave me a turn when the guinea pig did it the first time. Was that when you yelled? Said Diggory. Oh, you heard that, did you? I hope you hadn't been spying on me. No, I haven't, said Diggory indignantly, but what happened to Polly? Congratulate me, dear boy, said Uncle Andrew, rubbing his hands. My experiment succeeded. The little girl's gone, vanished, right out of this world. What have you done to her? Sent her to, well, another place. What do you mean, said Diggory. Uncle Andrew sat down and said, well, I'll tell you all about it. Have you ever heard of old Mrs. LaFay? Wasn't she a great aunt or something? Said Diggory. Not exactly, said Uncle Andrew. She was my godmother. That's her there on the wall. Diggory looked and saw a faded photograph. It showed the face of an old woman in a bonnet, and he could not now remember that he had once seen a photo of the same face in an old drawer at home in the country. He had asked his mother who it was, and Mother hadn't seemed to want to talk about the subject much. It was not at all a nice face, Diggory thought, though of course with those early photographs one never could really tell. Was there something wrong with her, Uncle Andrew? Well, said Uncle Andrew with a chuckle, it depends on what you call wrong. People are so narrow-minded. She certainly got very weird later in life, did very unwise things. That was why they shut her up. In an asylum, you mean? Oh, no, 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 said Uncle Andrew. Nothing of the sort, only in prison. I say, said Diggory, what had she done? Poor woman. She had been very unwise. There were a good many different things. She didn't go into all that. She was always just very kind to me. But look here, what has all this got to do with Polly? I do wish. All in good time. All in good time, my boy, said Uncle Andrew. They let out Mrs. LaFay out because she died, and I was one of the very few people whom she would allow to see her while she was ill. She had gone to dislike ordinary, ignorant people. Well, I do myself, but she and I were interested in the same sorts of things. It was only a few days before she died that she told me to go into her old bureau in her house and open a secret drawer and bring her a little box that I would find there. Let me show you this picture. Let's see, there's the box. The moment I picked up that box, I could tell that by the pricking in my fingers that I held some great secret in my hands. She gave it to me and she made me promise that as soon as she was dead, I would burn it, unopened, with certain ceremonies that I promised, but I didn't keep. Well, then, that was really rotten of you, wasn't it? Said Diggory. Rotten, said Uncle Andrew with a puzzled look. Oh, I see. You mean that little boys ought to keep their promises. Very true. Most right and proper, I'm sure, and I'm glad you have been taught to do it. But of course, you must understand that rules of that sort, however excellent they may be for little boys and servants and women and, well, even people in general, can't possibly be expected to apply to students and great thinkers. No, Diggory, men like me who possess hidden wisdom are freed from common rules just as we are cut off from common pleasures. Ours, my boy, is a high and lonely destiny. As he said this, he sighed and he looked so grave and noble and mysterious that for a second, Diggory really thought he was saying something rather fine. But then he remembered the ugly look he had seen on Uncle's face the moment before Polly vanished, and all at once he saw through Uncle Andrew's great words. All it means, he said to himself, is that he thinks he can do anything he wants to do, anything he wants. Of course, said Uncle Andrew. I didn't dare to open the box for a long time, for I knew it might contain something very dangerous. For my godmother was a very remarkable woman. The truth is, she was one of the last mortals in the country who had fairy blood in her. She said there had been two others in her time. One was a duchess, and the other was a charwoman. In fact, Diggory, you are now talking to the last man, possibly, who really had a true fairy godmother. There, that'll be something for you to remember when you are an old man. I bet she was a bad fairy, thought Diggory. But what about Polly? Said Diggory. How do you harp on that? Said Uncle Andrew, as if that was all that mattered. My first task, of course, was to study the box itself. It was very ancient, very old, and I knew enough even then that it wasn't Greek or old Egyptian or Babylonian or Hittite or Chinese. It was older than any of those nations. Ah, that was a great day when at last I found out the truth. The box was an Atlantean. It came from the lost island of Atlantis. That meant it was centuries old, older than any of the Stone Age things that were dug up in Europe. And it wasn't a rough, crude thing like them either. For in the very dawn of time, Atlantis was already a great city with palaces and temples and smart men. He paused for a moment as he expected Diggory to say something. But Diggory was disliking his uncle more and more every moment, so he said nothing. Meanwhile, continued Uncle Andrew, I was learning a good deal in other ways. It wouldn't be proper to explain them to a child about magic in general. That meant I came to have a fair idea of what sort things might be in the box. By various tests, I narrowed down the possibilities. I had to get to know some devilishly weird people and go through some very disagreeable experiences. That was what turned my hair gray. One doesn't become a magician for nothing. My health broke down in the end, but I got better. And at last, I actually knew. Although there was not really the least chance of anyone overhearing them, he leaned forward and he almost whispered as he said, the Atlantean box. Well, it contained something that had been brought from another world when our world was just beginning. What? Said Diggory, who was now interested in spite of himself. There was only dust, said Uncle Andrew. Fine, dry dust. Nothing much to look at, not much to show for a lifetime of toil, you might say. But when I looked at that dust, I took jolly good care not to touch it, and thought that every grain had once been in another world. I don't mean another planet, they're part of our world, and you could get to them if you went far enough, but a really other world, another nature, another universe, somewhere you would never reach, even if you traveled through the space of this universe forever and ever, a world that could be reached only by magic. Here, Uncle Andrew rubbed his hands till his knuckles cracked like fireworks. I knew, he went on, that if only you could get into the right form, that dust would draw you back to the place from where it came from. But the difficulty was to get it into the right form. My earlier experience were all failures. I tried them on guinea pigs. Some of them only died. Some exploded like Little bombs. It was a jolly cruel thing of you to do, said Diggory to a guinea pig. How do you keep getting off the point, said Uncle Andrew. That's what the creatures were for. I brought them myself. I bought them myself with my own money. Let me see, where was I? Oh, yes. At last I succeeded in making the rings, the yellow rings. But now a new difficulty arose. I was pretty sure now that a yellow ring would send any creature that touched it into the other place. But what would be the good of that if I couldn't get them back to tell me what they found there? And what about them? Said Diggory. A nice mess you've been in if you can't get them back. You will keep on looking at everything from the wrong point of view, said Uncle Andrew with a long look of impatience. Can't you understand that this thing is a great experiment? The whole point of sending anyone into the other place is that I want to find out what it's like. Well, why didn't you go there yourself? Said Diggory. Diggory had hardly ever seen anyone look so surprised and offended as his uncle. Me? Me? He exclaimed. The boy must be mad. A man at my time of life, in my state of health, to risk the shock and dangers of being flung suddenly into a different universe? I never heard anything so preposterous in all my life. Do you realize what you're saying? Think what another world means. You might mean anything. You might meet anything, see anything. And I suppose you sent Polly into them, said Diggory, and his cheeks were flaming with anger now. And all I can say, he added, even if you are my uncle, is that you behaved like a coward, sending a girl to a place you're afraid to go yourself. Here's a picture. Oops. Silence, sir, said Andrew, bringing his hand down on the table. I will not be talked to like that by a dirty little schoolboy. You don't understand. I'm a great scholar, the magician, the adept, who is doing the experiment. Of course, I need subjects to do it on. Bless my soul. You'll be telling me next that I ought to have asked the guinea pigs permission before I used them. No great wisdom can be reached without sacrifice. But the idea of my going myself is ridiculous. It's like asking a general to fight as a common soldier. Supposing I got killed, what would become of my life's work? Oh, do stop jawing, said Diggory. Are you going to bring Polly back? I was going to tell you when I was so rudely interrupted that I did at least find out one way of doing the return journey. The green rings will bring you back. But Polly hasn't got a green ring, said Diggory. No, Uncle Andrew said. Then she can't get back, said Diggory. And it's exactly the same as if you had murdered her, killed her dead. She can get back, said Uncle Andrew, if someone else will go after her wearing a yellow ring himself and taking 2 green rings with him, one to bring himself back and one to bring her back. And now, of course, Diggory saw the trap. He stared at Uncle Andrew, saying nothing, with his mouth wide open. His cheeks had gone very pale. I hope, said Uncle Andrew presently in a very high and mighty voice, just as if he were a perfect uncle who had given one of a handsome tip and some good advice. I hope, Diggory, he said, I hope you are not given to showing the white feather. I hope very shortly to think that any one of our family had not enough honor and chivalry to go to the aid of a lady in distress like Polly. Oh, shut up, said Diggory. If you had any honor at all, you'd be going yourself. But I know you won't. All right, I see. I've got to go. But you are a beast. I suppose you planned the whole thing from the start so that she'd go without knowing it, and then I would have to go after her. Of course, said Uncle Andrew with his hateful smile. Very well, I'll go, said Diggory, but there's one thing I mean to say first. I didn't believe in magic until today. I see now that it's real. Well, if it is, I suppose all the fairy tales are more or less true, and you're simply a wicked, cruel magician like the ones in the stories. Well, I've never read a story in which people of that sort weren't paid out in the end, and I bet you will be too. And it serves you right. Of all the things Diggory had said, this was the first that really went home. Uncle Andrew started, and there came over his face a look of such horror that, beast though he was, he could almost feel sorry for him. But a second later, he smoothed it away and he said with a rather forced laugh, well, I suppose that is a natural thing for a child to think, brought up among women as you've been. Old wives' tales, right? I don't think you need to worry about danger, Diggory. Wouldn't it be better to worry about the danger of your little friend, Polly? She'd been gone some time. If there are any dangers over there, well, it would be a pity to arrive a moment too late, now wouldn't it? A lot you care, said Diggory. But I'm sick of talking. What do I have to do? You really must learn to control that temper of yours, my boy, he said. Otherwise, you'll grow up to be just like your Aunt Letty. Now, attend to me. Listen to me. He got up, put on a pair of gloves, and walked over to the tray that contained the rings. They only work, said Uncle, if they're actually touching your skin. Wearing gloves, I can pick them up like this and nothing happens. If you carried one in your pocket, if you carried one in your pocket, nothing would happen. But of course, you'd have to be careful not to put your hand in your pocket and touch it by accident with your skin. The moment you touch a yellow ring, you vanish out of this world. And when you are in the other place, I expect, of course, this hasn't been tested yet, but I expect that the moment you touch a green ring, you vanish out of that world. And I expect that you might reappear in this world. Now, I take these two greens and I drop them into your right-hand pocket. And remember very carefully which pocket the greens are in now. And G is for green, R is for right, GR. You see, which are the first two letters of green? GR. One for you, one for the little girl. And now you pick up a yellow one for yourself. Put it on your finger. There'll be less chance of dropping it. Diggory had almost picked up the yellow ring when he suddenly checked himself. Look here, he said. What about Mother? Supposing she asks where I am? The sooner you go, said Uncle, the sooner you'll be back. But you don't really know whether I can get back, said Diggory. Uncle Andrew shrugged his shoulders, walked away, unlocked it, threw open the door and said, very well then, just as you please, go down and have your dinner. Leave the little girl to be eaten by wild animals, or drowned, or starved in the other world, or lost there for good, if that's what you prefer. It's all one to me. Perhaps before tea time, you'd better drop in on Mrs. Plummer and explain that she will never see her daughter again because you were too afraid to put on a ring. Don't I just wish I was big enough to punch your head, said Diggory. Then he buttoned up his coat, he took a deep breath, he picked up the ring, and he thought then, as he always thought afterward too, that he could not decently have done anything else but go.